Today, we are focusing on a commodity that underpins nearly everything, a metal that has traditionally been known as Dr. Copper.
That is the perfect historical nickname, because Dr. Copper was always seen as this reliable economic indicator if the copper price was climbing.
Right.
It meant manufacturers were building, construction was booming, infrastructure was expanding. It was a sure sign the global economy was healthy.
Precisely. But what our sources really highlight is that Dr. Copper has, well, it's undergone a dramatic elevation. It is no longer just a predictor of economic health.
Not at all.
It has become a critical strategic mineral, the very foundation of the modern green and digital economy. We're talking about massive electrification projects, renewables, the explosion of AI infrastructure.
And none of it moves forward without copper. And that transformation has created a full-blown crisis. Our analysis confirms an unprecedented structural demand for copper that the global supply chain, in its current state, simply cannot meet.
So this isn't a temporary blip.
No, this is a foundational shortage. It's driving massive financial investments, yes, but it's also fueling intense geopolitical tensions and carrying, severe human and environmental costs across the globe.
That structural imbalance is the core mission of this deep dive. We need to unpack the staggering supply deficits, examine the geographical choke points, the geopolitical risks those bottlenecks create.
And most importantly, I think, confront the extremely high human and environmental price being paid in this urgent global scramble for the metal.
So let's just put the severity of this on the table for you right away.
Yeah, let's. The world desperately needs copper to build a sustainable future, to meet its net zero goals. Yet, the urgent, often unregulated push to mine it is directly associated with human conflict and suffering. One data point just leaps off the page. Between 2010 and 2024, copper mining was linked to a staggering 513 allegations of human rights abuses.
513.
Yes, and that is a critical comparative statistic.
Yeah.
Copper accounts for 60% of all recorded allegations of abuses associated with all transition minerals tracked by observers.
Wow. So 60% of all of them.
All of them. This means that the cost of global decarbonization is, right now, being measured in instability and the violation of human rights in the world's poorest regions. We are literally fighting and dying over the metal that is supposed to save us from climate change.
Okay, so let's start with the fundamental question. Why copper? This metal has been around for millennia. Why is it so indispensable in this new high-tech, high-voltage era? Why can't we just swap it out?
Well, the answer is really rooted in the laws of physics and economics. Copper possesses this combination of properties that make it nearly impossible to substitute efficiently. First and foremost is its superior electrical conductivity. It's just the gold standard among common, affordable metals. Second, it offers excellent corrosion resistance, and it's highly malleable, so it can be easily drawn into the fine wires you need for motors and electronics.
And there's a third critical factor, which seems to be getting more and more important in the era of AI, and that's its thermal performance.
Exactly. Copper has exceptional thermal dissipation capacity. It just sheds heat so efficiently. In any high-performance electronic application, from a massive data center to an EV battery pack, you need two things. You need power flow, which is conductivity, and you need cooling.
And copper does both.
It provides both rules better than anything else.
Traditionally, copper was dominated by what? Construction and general electronics. Our sources show that as recently as 2023, about 49% of global consumption was still in those conventional sectors, but the energy transition is just completely altering that balance.
It's a massive disruption.
Yeah.
If you look at the historical figures, clean energy consumed maybe 20–25% of the annual copper supply. But under current aggressive forecasts, the demand for copper in clean energy applications alone, so EVs, wind, solar, grid upgrades,
Yeah.
that's projected to rise to an astounding 61% by 2040. This is a historic structural shift away from traditional uses and towards the infrastructure for electricity.
Let's zoom in on the specific sectors driving this colossal hunger. The most visible shift is in transportation, electric vehicles. How much more copper does an EV actually need compared to a regular gas-powered car?
EVs are true copper multipliers. I mean, a conventional vehicle uses, maybe 20 to 25 kilograms of copper, mostly for simple wiring.
Okay.
An EV, though, is essentially a gigantic battery and motor system. The average EV requires approximately 53 kilograms of copper.
53 kilograms.
Yeah. Depending on the model, that's anywhere from 2.4 to 4 times the amount of copper needed for a standard car. You need it for the battery pack, the motor windings, the inverters, the charging ports. It adds up extremely quickly.
And when you project the entire auto industry's push toward electrification, That multiplier effect scales terrifyingly fast.
The scale is staggering. If you look purely at the forecast for the EV sector, not even counting the charging infrastructure to support them, the demand for copper is projected to hit 2.8 million metric tons by 2030.
Wow.
That alone is more than the entire annual mine production of the United States and Canada combined. It's just a huge immediate spike.
So moving beyond cars, let's look at the massive infrastructure that actually generates the power. Wind and solar. These projects are enormous consumers of copper, often in ways you wouldn't expect.
They certainly are. Renewable generation is incredibly copper intensive, particularly offshore wind. A single large modern wind turbine, which might be 150 meters tall, it requires vast amounts of cabling.
Right, to get the power back to shore.
Exactly, both within the tower and, crucially, to transmit the power back. A single wind turbine can hold up to 30 tons of copper in its wiring, generators, and transformers.
30 tons in just one unit, and we're planning to build thousands of these.
Absolutely. And this investment is accelerating. Our sources indicate that copper demand, just from solar and wind infrastructure, is projected to rise 56% by 2027 over 2018 levels. We are currently in a hockey stick curve of demand growth.
And this brings us to the biggest challenge of all, the electric grid itself. Because you can build every solar panel and wind farm in the world, but if the grid can't handle the flow, the whole thing fails.
The grid is the ultimate copper sink. Experts project that global electric grid capacity needs to, well, fundamentally double by 2050. This isn't just maintenance.
Right.
This is a total overhaul and expansion requiring unprecedented amounts of copper for transmission lines, substations, local hookups, everything.
And there's a spatial factor here too, right? Driven by global urbanization.
Yes, as cities grow and modernize, they often shift from overhead lines to burying the wiring for aesthetics, for safety. But burying cables has a geometric penalty.
A penalty.
Yeah, underground wiring, because you need insulation and protection from ground heat, requires twice as much metal, double the copper, as overhead lines for the same capacity. This urbanization trend just accelerates the demand exponentially.
Okay, that's the power side of the ledger. Now let's talk about the digital revolution. The explosive growth of artificial intelligence is driving a consumption boom that I don't think many people associate with mining.
This is a major, often underestimated driver. AI processing demands incredibly high computational power and fast, specularized server architecture. This means significantly higher energy use and, crucially, immense thermal loads. Tremendous heat. When those processors are running at peak speed, they get incredibly hot.
And as we established, copper is the indispensable element here. It handles both conductivity and cooling.
Precisely. You need copper to bring the high-speed power to the ships, and you need copper heat sinks and cooling plates to efficiently dissipate the heat so the systems don't just melt. The entire data center industry is becoming a massive consumer of refined copper.
The forecasts here are truly eye-opening, given the scale of tech investment globally.
They are startling. Demand for copper in data centers alone is expected to grow up to sixfold by 2050.
Sixfold.
Sixfold. So when you combine the needs of EVs, massive renewable projects, the doubling of the global grid, and this sixfold growth in data center demand, you see why the scarcity alarm bells are ringing so loudly.
This intense, multi-sector, non-substitutable demand points to an inevitable conclusion: the looming supply gap. Let's quantify the strain. What are the numbers telling us?
Global copper demand is projected to reach approximately 28 million metric tons in 2025. That is the baseline need. But the projections show that existing and reliably planned supply routes simply cannot keep pace with this trajectory.
So what does that shortfall look like in the near term?
Well, market forecasts show a potential supply deficit that could hit 5.2 million tons globally by 2025. Now, to put that number into context for you, 5.2 million tons is more than the total annual mine production of the #1 and #2 global producers, Chile and Peru, combined. We are talking about the effective loss of the world's two largest suppliers almost overnight.
That gap is massive, and it only widens if we actually take climate action seriously.
It accelerates significantly.
Yeah.
If we factor in the aggressive net zero scenarios required to meet climate targets, the copper deficit could reach a staggering 11.0 million tons by 2030. That is a shortfall that threatens to entirely derail the speed and feasibility of the energy transition.
Okay, so we have a demand side that is structurally insatiable. Prices are high, they're signaling severe scarcity. So in theory, the market should respond. Why is production stuck? Why can't the mining industry just open the taps?
This is where we collide with the fundamental realities of geology, permitting, and massive, massive capital outlay. The main structural problem is the agonizingly long time horizon for mine development. This is not like opening a small factory.
Give us the timeline. How long does it actually take to bring a new copper mine online?
On average, it takes anywhere from 10 to 15 years from the moment a deposit is discovered to the point where the mine is actually producing saleable copper. Our sources even push that upper limit higher, suggesting the total process can stretch up to 16.5 years.
16 and a half years. So even if every mining company secured financing today, the earliest we would see any new copper hitting the market is around 2035.
Exactly. That time lag makes the 2030 deficit impossible to solve using traditional methods. And the scale of investment required to close that gap is immense. To meet that 2030 demand, analysts estimate the world would need about 80 new mines globally.
80 new mines.
And that translates into a capital expenditure of up to $250 billion in investment. That level of capital deployment demands certainty and long-term political stability, which is often lacking.
And this is where the behavior of Western mining companies becomes critical. It sounds like they are not rushing to take on that $250 billion risk in new or greenfield projects.
There is profound investor risk aversion today. The first reason is strategic. Major Western miners prefer M&A, mergers and acquisitions. Buying an existing mine means immediate cash flow and predictable costs.
Right. Digging a new hole is slow and politically volatile.
Exactly. And the second major deterrent is the rising tide of ESG environmental, social, and governance compliance requirements. The pressure is significant. Meeting stringent global standards adds massive complexity and cost to new projects. And when you look at the sheer capital intensity, you understand the reluctance. Opening a new capacity requires up to $25,000 in upfront capital per annual ton of capacity. It's an enormous bet.
So if they're facing 15-year timelines, political volatility, and huge capital costs, what price point did copper need to sustain to make that risk worth it for investors?
The market has done the math. Analysis suggests that for miners to commit the necessary capital for new mine development, copper prices must sustain a floor above $10,000 per ton.
But wait, the price is already hitting that threshold. Why aren't we seeing a massive greenfield investment boom right now? Is the ESG hurdle really a greater deterrent than the promise of these massive returns?
That is the perfect challenging question. And it suggests the problem is deeper than pure economics. The answer lies in the uncertainty of enforcement. A miner might spend billions of dollars planning a mine only for a regulatory body or a community lawsuit to halt the project indefinitely.
So it's the risk, not just the cost.
It's the risk. When you compare that long, risky bet against an immediate acquisition of a profitable mine, the choice becomes obvious for shareholders. ESG is necessary, but it has undeniably slowed the speed of extraction in regulated countries.
Moving from financial to geographical risk, let's talk about the concentration of supply. If a commodity is this critical, having the reserves concentrated in just a few places is a massive vulnerability.
It is the definition of strategic vulnerability. Over half of global copper reserves lie in just 5 countries. Chile at 20%, Australia and Peru both at 10%, the DRC at 8%, and the Russian Federation also at 8%.
So if something happens in just one of those 5,
The global market instantly spirals.
let's focus on the biggest players. Chile and Peru. Together, they account for what, nearly a third of annual global mine production?
They do, and they face chronic instability. Chile, the world's top producer, and Peru, number 2, both deal with recurring, often paralyzing labor strikes. Beyond that, there is strong resource nationalism, leading to regulatory shifts and tax hikes.
And there's severe social unrest, too.
Exactly, stemming from community opposition and land disputes. And on top of all that, there are geological constraints. Many of these decades-old mines are now processing declining ore grades, have to dig up and process significantly more rock just to get the same amount of copper.
Which drives up costs, water usage, everything.
Everything, and only exacerbates those social tensions.
And then there's the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, a major emerging player.
The DRC accounts for about 14% of 2024 production, but the operational volatility there is extreme. You have severe infrastructure limitations, just getting the concentrate out of remote locations, political risks, corruption, and massive social governance issues.
Okay, you also mentioned Russia. With 8% of global reserves, how does that play into the current geopolitical friction?
Well, the 8% reserve figure matters because it represents potential future supply that has been effectively removed from the Western-aligned global market. Western companies won't invest there, Western consumers won't buy from there.
So it forces everyone else to compete more fiercely for the remaining supply.
Exactly. It pushes up the price floor and deepens the deficit calculation, making everyone's reliance on Chile, Peru, and the DRC even more acute.
And finally, we have to look at the vulnerability caused by the changing climate itself.
Climate instability is now a primary operational risk. Volatile weather patterns, especially El Niño and La Niña, cause periodic catastrophic flooding and rainfall disruptions at major mines, particularly in South America.
So the problem we're trying to solve with copper is also making it harder to get the copper?
Precisely. Analysis suggests this increased volatility could raise the baseline for annual mine supply disruptions from the traditional 5% to 6%. That 1 percentage point might sound small, but at a global scale, that's hundreds of thousands of tons of copper removed from the market every year. Volatility is the new normal.
So we know that mining is slow, risky, geographically concentrated. But you mentioned earlier that the true strategic bottleneck isn't just getting the copper out of the ground, it's getting it refined.
That is the essential insight. The copper value chain is complex. You mine the ore, you process it into concentrate, and then you smelt and refine that into usable metal. Control over the refining stage grants undeniable strategic power.
Because almost all mining operations rely on that refining capacity to convert their raw product into something they can actually sell.
Exactly.
And here, our sources indicate one nation holds overwhelming dominance.
Absolutely. China holds the world's most extensive copper refining capacity. It accounts for a massive 45% of global output,
45%.
over 12 million metric tons annually. To illustrate the scale, China hosts 4 of the 5 largest copper smelters in the world. This is centralized control over the global transformation process.
And that capacity is fed by the rest of the world's mines.
Precisely. China imports 60% of global copper ores and concentrates. The raw material comes from Chile, Peru, the DRC, but China acts as the primary global processing hub. It takes the concentrate, transforms it into refined metal, and then exports that refined copper for manufacturing worldwide. They control the spigot.
This sounds like a massive strategic vulnerability for Western economies, especially ones trying to build out their own clean energy infrastructure.
It is a critical challenge. The United States is a clear example. The U.S. currently imports over 40% of its refined copper. If that 40% is coming from a single concentrated refining hub, any disruption there creates acute strategic risks.
So let's discuss the specific risks. What could cause a sudden critical disruption in 45% of global refining capacity?
There are 3 main threats. First, regulatory risk. We've seen large-scale environmental inspections in China force temporary shutdowns across multiple smelters at the same time, immediately tightening global supply. Second, energy risk. Regional power shortages can compel these massive, energy-intensive smelters to cut production.
And the third, of course, is geopolitical risk.
That's the most difficult to quantify. Any severe escalation in geopolitical tensions could lead to trade restrictions or supply chain weaponization. If you're a European manufacturer or a U.S. EV company, you are one crisis away from a devastating refined copper shortage that you have no domestic capacity to fill.
Now, there's a subtle mechanism that reinforces this vulnerability, and that's the trade barrier trap or tariff escalation. How does trade policy structurally limit developing nations from moving up the value chain?
This is a devastating cycle. When a country like Chile or Zambia exports raw, refined copper, it faces low tariffs, often under 2%. The system welcomes raw materials.
But the moment they try to add value,
the tariffs shoot up. If a developing country tries to manufacture a semi-finished product like copper wire, they face prohibitive tariffs. We see tariffs on copper wire reaching up to 8% in the Republic of Korea, 7.5% in India.
So it's a disincentive. Why would they invest billions in a domestic refining industry if their sophisticated product then faces a huge price penalty?
Exactly. It creates a vicious cycle. The producing nations remain dependent on exporting concentrates, which strengthens the grip of the large refining hubs, further concentrating the geopolitical risk.
Given this vulnerability, what policy responses are being recommended to build refining resilience outside of that one dominant region?
Policymakers are focusing on 3 things. First, strategic reserves, but at the refined metal level, ready to be used during a crisis. Second, direct incentives. Governments must fund, subsidize, and streamline permitting for domestic or allied nation refining capacity.
And the third strategy brings us back to what's already above ground: recycling.
Absolutely. Investing heavily in advanced recycling infrastructure is crucial. It bypasses the volatile mining and refining cycle entirely, creating a secure supply chain. Increasing secondary supply is a critical policy response.
We've established the economic and geopolitical imperatives, but we began with a shocking statistic: 513 allegations of human rights abuses. Let's now delve into what our sources call the dark side of this urgent transition.
This is the ethical intersection of climate ambition. The intense pressure to secure copper quickly, often in regions with poor governance, means that environmental and human rights standards are frequently neglected. The figure bears repeating: 413 recorded allegations between 2010 and 2024.
And that accounts for 60% of all recorded abuses across all transition minerals.
6 out of every 10 abuses. It emphasizes just how intense and poorly regulated this scramble is becoming.
Where are these allegations most concentrated?
They're concentrated in the critical supply nations. The highest number occurred in Peru at 14%, Chile at 11%, and the DRC at 10%. These abuses overwhelmingly affect local communities, often indigenous populations, who are usually the least equipped to fight back.
And the sources also detail the sheer danger faced by those who try to oppose these projects.
Yes, the violence is documented. The tracker recorded 157 physical attacks against human rights and environmental defenders. These are people standing up for clean water, for their land rights, against pollution. The urgency of the energy transition should not be a justification for an unprincipled scramble that drives these abuses.
Let's look specifically at the environmental consequences, focusing on water scarcity and pollution, a primary flashpoint.
Mining is tremendously water-intensive, particularly in the arid regions of the Andes, where so many copper deposits lie. The data shows that a shocking 52% of copper mines in high water stress areas have documented impacts on water access or caused catastrophic pollution.
52%.
When a mine consumes all the available water or contaminates the local river, community conflict is inevitable.
Our sources give us a detailed and harrowing case study from Chile involving the Los Pelambres mining company. This case seems to perfectly illustrate this conflict between global corporate need and local community survival.
The Los Pelambres company, owned by a massive conglomerate, has been plagued by environmental incidents for decades. Their history includes multiple verified spills of oil, industrial water, and copper concentrate, contaminating vital agricultural land and rivers.
And the state penalties for these infractions seem almost, well, meaningless.
They are laughably small. For example, in 2022, the company was fined just over $120,000 for spilling industrial water onto a riverbank. Our sources highlight the context. This fine was equivalent to just 0.02% of the company's 2009 profits.
0.02%.
When the cost of violating the law is negligible, there is no financial deterrent.
And that lack of accountability allows the company to use its resources aggressively against its opponents. Tell us about the lawsuits filed against local residents.
This represents an extreme power imbalance. The company is actively pursuing civil lawsuits against 32 local residents, many of them elderly or disabled, after they opposed the expansion of pipelines and protested pollution. These residents are small farmers and shrimp fishers.
And what kind of compensation is this multi-billion-dollar company seeking from them?
In one case, against 5 residents who blocked a road to demand solutions for drinking water pollution, the company sued them, seeking compensation for damages totaling over $1 million.
$1 million from subsistence farmers.
Yes. Legal experts and opponents view these actions as a clear form of moral and financial intimidation, designed to bankrupt and silence dissent. It sends a message: do not oppose the project.
It's hard to even process. What is the lasting psychological and societal impact of a global clean energy transition being paid for by a handful of local farmers who lose their land and face life-ruining litigation?
The impact is corrosive. It breaks trust in institutions. It validates the view that global resource companies operate above the law, and it destroys the social fabric of communities. They feel sacrificed for global climate goals set far away by people who will never see the contamination. This is the dark side, the moment the green economy becomes the conflict economy.
Beyond spills and social conflict, the Los Pelambres case also documented irreparable ecological damage.
This is perhaps the most serious consequence. Studies confirm the company damaged and removed extensive rock glaciers in the mountainous area during its expansion. Rock glaciers aren't just ice. They're critical, long-term, slow-releasing water reserves for the entire arid ecosystem.
How significant was that loss?
The damage was equivalent to destroying between 1.89 and 2.84 million cubic meters of water. A glaciologist confirmed the outcome, stating that once a rock glacier is destroyed, there is no turning back. That water reserve is permanently gone.
From a region already grappling with severe drought.
Exactly. And to cap it off, the company was even caught extracting water illegally during a time of officially recognized drought, fined over $500,000 for it. It's a stark look at the difficulty of balancing the world's desperate need for copper with genuinely responsible extraction.
Given the supply constraints, the geopolitical risks, and this high human cost, it seems obvious that innovation must play a role. Are there any realistic substitutes for copper?
Substitution is a holy grail for material scientists, but it's incredibly difficult. The most common and economically viable alternative is aluminum.
It's lightweight, abundant, much cheaper. It sounds ideal for the power grid or even EVs. What are the key limitations?
The main limit is performance. While lighter, aluminum is only about 60% as conductive as copper. To carry the same amount of current, you have to use physically larger, thicker aluminum cables.
Which offsets some of the weight savings and takes up more space.
Right, the critical constraint in places like EV wiring harnesses. Plus, aluminum has inferior thermal and mechanical properties, so the lines require more maintenance.
However, there's significant innovation happening in aluminum alloys to close that gap.
Absolutely. Companies like NanoAL have developed advanced alloys like Nano 6000 T9 designed to replace the steel core in high-voltage transmission cables. This particular alloy is 60% stronger than other aluminum alloys and approaches 48% of copper's conductivity.
48% is still well below 100, but if it's replacing a steel core, which is a very poor conductor, the innovation is creating a lighter core that can also carry more current.
It's a promising step for power transmission lines. But we must be clear, copper remains virtually irreplaceable in several high-performance roles, especially in microprocessors, and, crucially, the anode current collectors in lithium batteries. Aluminum can't be used there.
Okay, so aluminum is an imperfect situational substitute. Let's move to the cutting edge. Carbon nanotubes, or CNTs. This sounds like the breakthrough that could solve the problem.
CNTs are indeed the futuristic solution everyone is watching. Korean researchers successfully built a prototype electric motor that runs entirely without metal coils, using cables made from carbon nanotubes.
What's the major potential game changer of using CNTs, particularly in transportation?
The immense weight advantage. Nanotube conductors are roughly 1/5 as dense as copper. Think about an eVTOL in an electric aircraft. If you replaced all the copper, you could shave off 300 to 500 pounds.
That is a massive operational saving. But what are the current performance and, critically, the economic trade-offs?
The performance gap remains enormous. In the prototype test, the CNT motor achieved 3,420 RPM, while an equivalent copper coil motor hit over 18,000 RPM. The raw electrical conductivity of the CNT cables is still far lower than copper's.
So we have the weight advantage, but the power density is lacking. Now let's talk production scale and cost.
This is the biggest obstacle. Specialized carbon nanotube cables can cost upwards of $375 to $500 per kilogram to manufacture.
Wow.
Compare that directly to the price of refined copper, which is around $10 to $11 per kilogram. Until there's a monumental breakthrough in scaling production and drastically cutting the cost, they remain a highly niche solution.
So innovation alone cannot close the massive supply gap. That leaves us with the only other viable supply source, recycling.
Recycling is absolutely essential. It uses dramatically less energy than mining and refining new copper. It currently provides about 20% of global refined copper supply, which is about 4.5 million tons in 2023.
Is that 20% enough to bridge the forecasted supply deficit?
Unfortunately, no. While recycling is a strategic imperative, it alone is not expected to fully bridge the massive forecasted demand gap of 5 to 11 million tons annually. You can only recycle the copper that's already in the system.
And the transition requires adding vast amounts of new copper to the grid, to batteries, to data centers.
Exactly. So we fundamentally need new primary mining to feed the initial growth. Recycling stabilizes the long-term supply, but it doesn't solve the immediate scarcity crisis.
We've navigated the entire copper supply chain today. From its unparalleled utility in powering the green transition to the structural deficit that threatens to derail it, the geopolitical choke points, and the high human and environmental price being paid.
The synthesis is stark. Copper is the foundational metal of global decarbonization. Without it, the clean energy and digital transitions stall completely. Yet, the current global supply mechanism is failing. It is structurally inadequate, financially constrained, and dangerously concentrated.
And most alarmingly, the urgency of the need is creating a global resource scramble that is overriding fundamental human rights and environmental protection, driving conflict and pollution in the very countries we rely on for the supply.
Resolving this crisis cannot be left to the market alone. It requires concerted global policy action. Governments must streamline permitting, provide financial backing for those high-risk new mining projects, and crucially, invest in local value addition in producing countries, breaking that tariff trap.
In the face of a structural deficit projected to reach 11 million tons by 2030, this is no longer just a question of commodity market volatility, this is a matter of climate security.
Absolutely. And that leaves us with our final provocative thought for you. Copper is designated the single most critical mineral for the energy transition because we need it to fight climate change. But if the global race for this indispensable metal leads to increased social conflict, the destruction of vital environmental reserves like glaciers, and increased reliance on volatile, conflict-ridden jurisdictions, are we truly transitioning to a sustainable future? Or are we simply trading one global risk reliance on volatile fossil fuels for a whole new set of resource wars and conflicts defined by the desperate scramble for copper? Think about that balance as you watch the price of Dr. Copper continue to climb.